Hi guys, I'm Paul Pluta. I'm the method actor who plays Archibald Chesterfield III on the ArchieLuxury channel. I'm also a rail advocate, and today I want to talk about Jesus. That's right, I want to talk about Jesus. Is there a God? And as somebody who lost their mother when I was 15 years old, Christianity and is there a God and all that sort of thing has always been a bit of a contentious issue. However, let me tell you this. In March, early March, actually, was it March? When was it? Well, it was, earlier this year, I was charged by the police, the Crime and Corruption Commission, the CCC. I was charged with disclosure of a confidential document. And since I was charged, I can actually reveal that I was earlier in the previous year, I actually went to a star chamber. And when I after I was charged, which was early March, I could then reveal the fact that I had actually been sent to the Star Chamber. Enter the Star Chamber. Enter the Star Chamber. And a good friend of mine, Murray Cranston, he was a very good friend of mine, a lifelong member of the LNP, the National Party actually, which then became the LNP. He always was a good Catholic, He married a nun in training and he had a number of children, and he was just a really great guy. I really loved Murray. Anyhow, fast forward, and Murray's on death's door. That's right. He's unfortunately, he had a growth in his lung, which was then removed. Then a couple of years later, this horrible cancer has spread very, very rapidly. Anyhow, I wanted to talk to Murray and say, hey, how's it going? I didn't realize how bad it was. Anyhow, he rang me eventually, and it was no good. He told me it is ending very, very soon. So it was a bit of a shock indeed there. And Murray always had a great sense of humor, and I said to him, look, Murray, I don't want to be rude, I don't want to be mean, but if you're going across to the other side and there is something there, can you please help me with my case against the CCC? And I said to him, hey, I'd really appreciate if you're going over to the other side. It doesn't hurt to ask. I said to Murray, I said, could you possibly get me to win? Could you get this thing over with? And I didn't want to have jail time or get convicted. I wanted to get this terrible thing out of my life. And Murray, being the cool guy that he was, said, yeah, sure, Paul, don't worry about it. I'll make sure it's fixed up. He said to me, if I go, which probably will be sooner than later, I'll make sure it's fixed up. And that's exactly what happened. The funny thing is, then the poor guy died, And I went to the funeral. How's this for a sign? The funeral was a day before my court case. And I went to his funeral. The next day I went to court, and guess what? Mysteriously, they had mislaid all the paperwork. So I went home. My barrister did say to me, "Hey, Archie, just calm down. It's not quite over." He said, "Just hold it." Anyhow, that night I had a few drinks and a few toasts to Murray, and sure enough, guess what happened? Murray may have got the paperwork lost, but the filth came over the next day and gave me a new notice to appear. It seemed that Murray had an intervention with the paperwork, but the CCC wasn't going to take that lying down. No. They came out again. Again, Murray helped me further because they had actually given me a new court date, which fell on a public holiday. And then what happened was, well, they then discovered this, and they came out again and gave me a new date. So Murray's trying to be helpful. He's got them to lost their paperwork. He threw a few spanners in the works, and it kind of, the wrong day, and they just ballsed it up there. Murray, I honestly think it was heavenly intervention. So, anyhow, what happens then? Of course, they come out. See, they're a very tenacious bunch. They weren't going to take no for an answer. So, I got to tell you, then what happened, that it goes to, we went, next lot, it's in the system, yada, yada, yada. And what happens then? Well, one can only assume it's divine intervention, because the prosecutor, he was sick, so they had to stand in, and they'd made a few mistakes. So I seriously think the CCC should Star Chamber Jesus, God, and St. Peter, and Murray. They should Star Chamber those individuals. That's what I think they should do. They should Star Chamber those individuals. And I gotta be honest with you, I think there was a divine intervention. I think the CCC should interview them. I think they should send them to a coercive hearing, and they should throw the book at them. Yes. So to answer your question, is there a God? It seems highly possible. And, you ask for things, but he can't always give you things. Like, I asked Murray if he could, do a few things. They were still tenacious, very tenacious fuckers. So, yeah. Is there a God? That is the question. I still think the CCC should Star Chamber Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, St. Peter, Murray, deceased. They should Star Chamber them. That's what I think should happen. So, yeah. That's my story, and very interesting. turn of events. I think a coercive interview, a star chamber, is in order. I'm Paul Pluta. Tell me what you guys think of that.
Well, the time being just after 9 o'clock, I'll welcome everyone and we'll go through the normal introductions. I'm Tim Nichols, the Chair of the Committee and the Member for Clayfield. Joining me on the committee today are Ms Joan Peace, the Deputy Chair and the Member for Lytton, Mr Michael Crandon, the Member for Coomera, Mr Shane King, the Member for Koowanba, Mrs Melissa McMahon, the Member for McAllister, Mrs Sharice Mullen, the Member for Jordan, and Dr Mark Robinson, the Member for Udjuru. The committee is beginning its meeting today in public to deal with a number of matters. It will then commence its public meeting with the Crime and Corruption Commission. Can I thank you all for being so interested in the affairs of the committee to be here well before your time is required. I hope you find the meeting interesting and exciting up until that time. The committee will close the public part of the meeting and continue the remainder of its meeting in private session. We're currently scheduled to finish the public meeting at approximately 9:45 a.m, but that time may run over should the committee determine. The proceedings today are lawful proceedings and subject to the standing rules and orders of the Legislative Assembly, and as such I remind all visitors that any person admitted to this meeting may be excluded at my discretion as Chair or by order of the committee in accordance with Standing Order 208. Those here today should note that the proceedings are being broadcast live on the Parliament's website and that you may be filmed or photographed by any media present, and I note that there are media in the room today. You may also be included in photos taken by Parliamentary Service staff for purposes including posting on Parliament's website or social media services. Declare the meeting open. Are there any apologies? Mr McSwarren, a matter that we've raised before, and that is the Pluta matter, which seems to have fallen over, according to reports there. Are you satisfied with the way that matter has been handled?
Oh, frankly, no. Only in this sense, procedurally. You know, you're aware of there being a mistake. It's easily done, we know, but it's not a good look to issue a notice to appear that is returnable on a holiday. That happened twice, I think.
And then subsequently on a Sunday, I think.
A Sunday. Anyway, the matter came on, as you know, last week, and it was effectively the prosecution offered no evidence. We've just got the transcript, we're reviewing it, but essentially the reason for it was that the main witness, and bear in mind that the offence charge was revealing the fact that Mr Pluta had been summoned to a coercive hearing at our premises. That's a confidential process. People who are summoned are warned about that they shouldn't be talking about it. When they come in for the hearing, they're told directly that they can't discuss it with anyone except their lawyer, for good reasons, to preserve the integrity of the investigation. The allegation is that he then went and discussed the fact that he'd been called in and had the notice, and showed the notice to a person who was then working at Queensland Rail. That person had given a signed statement to the prosecution, was the basis for the prosecution, and as it turned out, that person did not remain cooperative. Ultimately, did not turn up on the court date, and regrettably, it transpired that despite many attempts to contact him, by way of text messages, emails and so forth, phone calls that weren't answered, he remained uncooperative. The prosecution applied to adjourn the matter to pursue him and get him to court, and the magistrate inquired about whether he'd been properly summoned, which, as you know, means he's compelled, and if he doesn't turn up he can be subject to a warrant to bring him before the court. He'd been served by email, which was not permitted under the Justices Act provision. So the magistrate, I think understandably in those circumstances, refused the adjournment. The prosecutor had no choice but to offer no evidence, and in those circumstances the charge was dismissed. We're reviewing all those circumstances from a whole lot of different perspectives, but they're the facts essentially as we know them currently.
It just strikes me that on the day of the hearing, the prosecution must have well been aware that their primary evidence was not going to attend. If you say that there have been emails, text messages, phone calls and all of those things, and yet on what now seems to be the third return date for a prosecution of this matter, they then offer no evidence, irrespective of the rights or wrongs of either the person who's the subject of the prosecution. It does seem to me to be a real failing, if I can put it that way, in terms of following the prosecution, understanding what's going on. Do your officers monitor the prosecution, because this one was not carried out by you, it was carried out by police, or was it carried out by DPP?
No, it was by police. It was a simple offence under our Act. And then, so it went in the ordinary course. After we charged Mr. Pluta,
Yep.
the brief went to the QPS,
The Police Prosecution Service, yep.
and the police prosecutor was handling it. I agree with everything you've said, except one small point, that is that we knew, or must have known, that the witness was not going to turn up. I don't think we can put it quite that highly, although you have to have strongly suspected, given the background circumstance, that he was a no-show. But if you have no contact with him and can't otherwise force him to come to court, you're sort of stuck with that, and it only comes to a head on the day that he's supposed to appear. So the issue I'm more concerned about is the belief that he'd be served by email. That's a failing, it seems to me, on the face of it.
Yes.
It's been just wrong and more. So we need to do better, I agree with that.
Do you monitor the progress of those things, or do you rely on the prosecution service to if you like, follow through those procedures?
No, it's our responsibility. If we arrest and charge, we give a notice to appear, as I think this case was.
Yes.
It's our responsibility to ensure the witness attends,
Yes.
and to issue the relevant paperwork to compel them.
Yes.
That's ordinarily the job of the police officer who charges the individual. So in that case, it's our responsibility. If when we accept, it's our problem. Yeah.
Okay.
It's our fault.
Thank you.
ABC Radio Brisbane.
Streaming live online and on the ABC Listen app. This is ABC Radio Brisbane with Steve Austin.
If you're travelling on the trains, you don't have to worry about the traffic. Despite the fact that it's first day back at school, normally traffic is at its heaviest around these times. But all the trains are running on time. And I mention the trains because you'll want to hear my next story, which really goes to the heart of what's wrong here in Queensland and why our systems of accountability go awry. 23 degrees in Brisbane, Bayside 22, Logan 23, Ipswich 25, the Gold Coast 20, and the Sunshine Coast 22. Give me a call if you see something happening around the streets of Brisbane. 1300 222 612 is a phone number, or send a text 0467 922 612. Well, a major embarrassment in court this morning for the Crime and Corruption Commission when they offered no evidence against rail advocate and self-described whistleblower Mr. Paul Pluta. Mr. Pluta warned then Minister for Transport Sterling Hinchliffe about a looming train driver shortage. Now, you know this story as rail fail. After it was revealed that Queensland Rail didn't have enough train drivers, the CCC started investigating how a report was released to the media. The CCC controversially used their coercive hearing powers against Paul Pluta, who was alleged to have leaked the report of the QR train driver shortage at the beginning of the rail fail. The CCC charged Mr. Pluta not with leaking any documents, but actually with telling someone, passing on to a third party, that he had been hauled before their star chamber using the coercive powers. Now let me just clarify for you, make very clear. The Crime and Corruption Commission is Queensland's peak crime fighting body. It has extraordinary powers, the powers of a standing royal commission. And in their own words, the CCC's coercive hearings power is, quote, most often sought by Queensland Police for unsolved murders, organised crime investigations involving drug trafficking, money laundering, or crimes involving the use of weapons. End of quote. So why did they use their coercive powers on a middle-aged, overweight white guy? In his own words. Paul Pluta, you don't see this entirely as a win for you in the court today. Why not?
Oh, look, it's definitely not a win in the sense that, look, I'm very happy with the result. Let's just clarify that there. I mean,
yes.
I'm a lower middle class, overweight white guy, okay? To continually mount legal battles, hugely costly. This is a fantastic result for me because basically my case against the CCC was dismissed today by a magistrate. The prosecution offered no evidence against me, so I am over the moon. Okay, so let's not avoid that. But no, I'm very happy with the way justice has prevailed, and it didn't go to a trial. So I mean, look.
But it's not a win. The CCC offered no evidence, and I think that frustrates you somewhat.
No. I don't want to sell my house. I don't want to sell everything of value to fight senseless battles with David. David
Yes,
and Goliath.
David and Goliath.
Okay?
So let me ask you a couple of specific questions. First of all, did you think it was appropriate that the Crime and Corruption Commission used their coercive hearings powers, normally reserved for drug kingpins and organised crime people, to pursue you?
This is an interesting question. If you look back at the original Fitzgerald edict when they set this type of thing up, for whistleblower type people like me, where I have made no financial advantage, I have gained nothing but trouble out of it. This was purely public interest. For whistleblower type people, in the past, you needed to get sign off from a very senior judge. I think it may have been a Supreme Court judge, but if not a Supreme Court judge, it's certainly a very senior judge. Now, the CCC is basically judge, jury, and executioner all in one. And I got to be completely honest with you. What sort of state has secret police? Okay, what sort of state has coercive hearings? So you don't have the right to silence. I've never heard of these things before.
Well, then let me ask you, I'll get you to answer my question. I said, did you think it's appropriate for the Crime and Corruption Commission to use their coercive powers, normally reserved for organised crime figures, to pursue you over an embarrassing political leak on train driver numbers?
I think it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, if anything, they should be giving me a gong. They should be giving me a medal for standing up and saying, hey, here's the faults. I mean, the emperor has no clothes. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I used to drink the Kool-Aid, the ALP Kool-Aid, okay? I was a young Labor. I even made a cup of tea for Wayne Goss years ago. And I believed when Labor was in, you could have freedom of speech. You weren't arrested. You weren't, they didn't have secret interviews. And I got to tell you the truth, the Kool-Aid I was drinking is a lie. Okay? The Kool-Aid I was drinking is a lie. There is only freedom of speech in Queensland if you say what the government is saying. You make a minister look bad, you make them look bad, they will come after you. Okay? And I've got to tell you this. You look at my case.
Well, let me ask you, your case was one where, at the beginning of the rail fail, as it's now known,
Yes.
You got hold of and released a document, the INDEC report, that revealed that there was a known train driver shortage looming in Queensland Rail, and you released it to the media. The minister at the time, Sterling Hinchliffe, was embarrassed and clearly didn't know. Do you see what took place where the Crime and Corruption Commission charged you as some sort of political payback, do you?
Look, let me tell you this. Even before I released, that was the INDEC report, I had written to the minister personally. That was the first flare-up in the newspaper.
Sterling Hinchliffe.
I had written to Sterling and told him the problems. I'd even written to the CCC to tell them about the problems. To be honest with you, I'd already gone to them and said, hey, this is some problems. They told me to get stuffed. I got a form letter back from Sterlo, and I got a form letter back from the CCC, which basically said, get stuffed.
You mean no case, didn't listen to you, no case to answer, nothing to see here?
Just a form letter, a fob off.
Okay, but I think that later came out that the Minister, Sterling Hinchliffe, wasn't aware of the INDEC report that identified there was a looming train driver shortage.
That's correct. And the interesting thing is, in Parliament itself, in Hansard, they actually used my copy of the INDEC report, which was later than the copy that was supplied to Sterling himself by the department.
So my question to you was, do you regard this as some form of political payback, the fact that you were charged under what's the powers, the coercive hearings powers, where you lose the right to silence? It's called the Star Chamber, and normally it's reserved for organised crime figures and drug lords, and yet they pursued you,
Of course.
Paul Pluta, a railways advocate.
This is complete payback. I mean, if you say anything against the government, I'd like to make it as a warning there. If there's any people out there who are thinking of whistleblowing, put your head in the sand. Don't reveal nothing. These people will come after you. They will bankrupt you. Let me tell you this. I had the police turn up at my house 3 times.
3 times the Crime and Corruption Commission served you with notices to appear.
Correct.
Do you regard that as some form of harassment?
It's either absolute incompetence. I'm not making any statement on it. I'm just telling you the facts.
Yes.
You can make whatever you want of it. Are they that hopeless? I don't know. I don't know. How could they have got it wrong? I got 3 notices to appear. Now they allege they made a mistake on one of the dates. They allege these things, but
Yes.
I cannot believe that senior, experienced task force like this. It seems very, very, very strange. Okay?
Can I ask you then, Paul Pluta, does the Parliamentary Oversight Committee, the Crime and Corruption Committee, or the Parliamentary Commissioner need to examine how this happened, how an ordinary guy who's a rail advocate ends up getting dragged before the Star Chamber of the Crime and Corruption Commission and charged, and when it actually gets to court, as has happened to you today, the prosecution from the Crime and Corruption Commission didn't even offer any evidence? Does that need to be examined by the Parliamentary Committee or the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Crime and Corruption Commission?
This is what they should be looking to. Don't worry about my case. Don't worry about my case. I honestly, I am happy the matter is over. I can go back to my lower middle class ways in my
Yes.
lower middle class suburb.
You wrote to the then Minister, Sterling Hinchliffe, and advised him of a looming train driver shortage.
Yes.
You've now proved your case.
Yes.
It's now been proved that you were right,
Yes.
and all the authorities ignored you.
Yes.
So what's your feeling then about when you tried to warn both the Minister in the Queensland government, and you even went to the Crime and Corruption Commission initially to warn them that something was wrong, that for some reason they weren't doing anything about this looming train driver shortage? You've proved your case.
Yes. Well, I tell you what, I've paid a high price.
And so what's your message to the state government
my
then?
advice to anyone out there is, don't get involved. Don't whistleblow. They will drag you through the mud. I mean, if I had a conventional job, do you think turning up at court 7 times, it's a great way to get your contract extended. It's a great way to get a promotion when you're constantly taking days off to appear at court cases.
What's been the effect on your life, Paul Pluta?
My life is absolutely devastated. I tell you what, I've learned a very valuable lesson. Do not whistleblow. You are told. You are told. I had Terry O'Gorman's firm represented me at that stage. If they think I'm lying, I can be jailed. If I don't answer a question, I can be jailed. If I refuse to answer, you can be jailed. If I don't turn up, can be jailed. What sort of state has a secret police force on its citizens? I'm a clean skin. I haven't been charged. I've got a clean record. I'm just a lower middle class, boring guy. Okay, I've never seen this sort of... I didn't know. This is the most scariest event of my life.
Paul Pluta, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Rail advocate Paul Pluta, the man who advised the Queensland government and the Crime and Corruption Commission that there was a problem in QR, a man who advised the Minister that there was a train driver shortage. He was subsequently proved correct, but for reasons that have not been clearly answered, the Crime and Corruption Commission, Queensland's peak crime-fighting body, took him into their star chamber under their coercive powers provisions, questioned him, and because he told a third party that he'd been questioned in their star chamber, they then laid charges against him. The matter was heard in a Brisbane court today, and the CCC, the Crime and Corruption Commission, offered no evidence. Now, we're pursuing this story. You'll hear, I should mention, by the way, that we've spoken previously with Terry O'Gorman about this. The Council of Civil Liberties expressed their very real concern about what the Crime and Corruption Commission have done to a citizen. To find out today that they didn't even bother to offer evidence. Now, I didn't hear what the judge had to say, but I wish I was. They offered no evidence. We'll be speaking with Mr. O'Gorman, we believe, just after 6 this evening about what should happen next. And we'll put in a call. We have, I should mention, by the way, we did call the Crime and Corruption Commission at 1:30 this afternoon. At this stage, I've not heard back from them. We also contacted Queensland's Attorney General's office, Yvette Darth. At this stage, we've not heard back from her either. That's from now.
This is ABC Radio Brisbane with Steve Austin.
Well, let's go back to the matter in court today where rail advocate and self-described whistleblower Paul Pluta faced court after the Crime and Corruption Commission brought charges against him. When the matter was heard in court today, the Crime and Corruption Commission offered no evidence.
This is complete payback. I mean, if you say anything against the government, I'd like to make it as a warning there. If there's any people out there who are thinking of whistleblowing, put your head in the sand. Don't reveal nothing.
That's Paul Pluta from earlier on today. Terry O'Gorman from the Council of Civil Liberties said he should never have been subject to the coercive hearing power in the first place. Now, I should make it clear that Mr. O'Gorman's law firm did at one stage act for Mr. Pluta, but because of the secrecy rules under the Crime and Corruption Commission Act, Mr. O'Gorman is not permitted to discuss what another lawyer in his firm did as a part of his representation of Paul Pluta. And Mr. O'Gorman only learnt of this connection tonight. So Terry O'Gorman, Mr. Pluta's clearly upset. He faced charges. Why?
Well, he faced charges according to news reports today for showing to someone else a summons that commanded him to appear before the Star Chamber. Now, having listened to Mr. Pluta's obviously very upset interview this afternoon, one can understand his being upset. He had to prepare and no doubt pay lawyers to go to court for him today. The matter was dropped. His angst and his outrage can be understood. He's got the right, as anyone else does, who has a complaint about the Crime and Corruption Commission, to go to the Parliamentary Commissioner, who's got the power to investigate it, and then refer it to the Parliamentary Committee. What should the Parliamentary Commissioner examine? Well, the Parliamentary Commissioner should examine all aspects of Mr. Pluta's complaint. As you said in the intro, I only learned when I heard the interview with Mr. Pluta half an hour ago that, in fact, someone else within my firm represented him, and as you observed, the secrecy rules, or laws, not just rules, prevent me from even discussing with that sort of what went on in that case. But listening to Mr. Pluta, he clearly is outraged. He clearly is a quite public-spirited sort of fellow. He sees that he's been victimised, and it's important for his grievance and for the public perception that arises from his grievance that the Parliamentary Commissioner step in, contact Mr. Pluta and say, OK, I've heard your interview, you want to make a complaint, I'll investigate it.
I'll leave it there and see what happens down the track. Terry O'Gorman, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Steve.
Terry O'Gorman, Queensland Council for Civil Liberties. Mr. O'Gorman's firm did at one stage act for Mr. Pluta, but because of secrecy laws under the Crime and Corruption Commission Act, we're not permitted to discuss what another lawyer in his firm did as part of the representation of Paul Pluta. I have received a very brief reply from the Crime and Corruption Commission saying simply that they are considering their options, and we will put in further calls to the State Government and the Parliamentary Crime and Corruption Commission Oversight Committee to find out if they're prepared to take a look at this matter.
Hello, Linda.
QR's got no one to blame except themselves.
Paul Pluta is the whistleblower behind documents which revealed the extent of the driver shortage.
It's the executives at QR who should be ashamed of themselves. They should get out of their Statesman, get out of their 5 Series BMW and take the train.
Since the data was collected, the Queensland rail saga has claimed a Transport Minister and a CEO. Now a new minister says she's determined to fix it.
Queensland's Crime and Corruption Commission has helped break open some of the state's biggest cases in recent years. Its secretive coercive hearings have forced witnesses to give up vital information, but some critics say the powers are being overused and go too far.
This is one of Queensland's most secretive rooms. Those called to testify in the so-called Star Chamber have no right to silence. If they refuse to cooperate or lie, they can be jailed.
They're a very powerful tool we use, but we take very seriously the use of them, and we have to convince ourselves that there is a proper basis to use the powers.
Evidence from CCC hearings helped convict 2 men over the McCulkin murders, a crime that had been unsolved since the 70s. In the Tiali Palmer case, the CCC trapped her foster family in a lie. Eventually, they gave up the killer, foster father Rick Thorburn. But while there's widespread support for the Star Chamber's use in major investigations, there's also concern the right to silence is being taken away in low-level cases.
There has to be some balance, a balance between police powers, CCC powers on the one hand and civil liberties on the other.
Over a decade, the number of investigative hearings have quadrupled to more than 340 a year. In 2017, Brisbane YouTuber Paul Pluta leaked top-secret documents detailing problems with Queensland Rail timetables and trains.
Newgen is a huge up.
It's understood he was summoned to the Star Chamber and forced to reveal his source. He's since been charged with allegedly revealing he was called to face a hearing.
It'd be different if you were talking about a terrorist incident, but this was talking about problems within Queensland Rail that needed in the public interest to be disclosed.
People who have access to confidential information are under an obligation of trust not to disclose that without very good reason. If there's, for instance, a belief that they want to blow the whistle, as it were, they should come to us confidentially.
The CCC doesn't release transcripts or recordings of its coercive hearings. In many cases, even telling someone you've been summoned to testify can be an offence. Civil libertarians want the powers reined in, but the CCC insists it's kept in check by the courts and a parliamentary oversight committee. Christian Silva, ABC News.